Every time the world begins to feel unstable, the same name starts to reappear: Leviathan. Not as a rumor, not as a coincidence, but as an ancient memory being forced back to the surface. See, the beast of chaos doesn't return because something new is swimming beneath the waves. It returns because we are trying to name a feeling that the world has become larger, heavier, and far less predictable than it was yesterday.
Today, we are not looking for a monster. We're looking for why, in times of chaos, humanity reaches for this specific name. And why thousands of years later, it's still the only name that fits.
Before Leviathan was debated, interpreted, and shared online, it was described. And the description does not simply invite imagination, it overwhelms it. Leviathan is portrayed as immense. A body layered in impenetrable armor, scale pressed against scale so tightly that no blade can find purchase. Its form is described as coiled and vast, moving through the depths as though the sea itself must part to allow it passage. Its breath is said to pour out like smoke and flame. Its presence turns water violent. The depths churn simply because it moves. Strength is meaningless against it.
Weapons don't just simply fail in battle. They fail before the encounter even begins. The text is very specific. No harpoon, no spear, and no human tool can possibly pierce its hide. What is forged breaks, and what is thrown falls away. It does not flee, it does not charge, and it does not roar and challenge. Ultimately, it does not acknowledge us at all. It simply exists, ancient, sealed, and indifferent. As if it wasn't born from this world, but set within it.
The language does not describe speed or cunning. Instead, it describes inevitability. And only after establishing that physical dominance does the text clarify something essential. When Leviathan appears in biblical writing, it isn't simply framed as evil. It represents chaos in its oldest sense, something vast, uncontrollable, and far beyond human authority. Not just malice, corruption, or rebellion, but chaos as scale, chaos as power, and chaos as something that exists whether humanity is ready for it or not. There is no story where Leviathan is hunted by man, no tale where it is slain, and no victory written into its existence.
Because Leviathan is not a test of our courage. Instead, it's a boundary, and one that's been made unmistakably clear.
In the text, Leviathan is not presented as something humanity might one day overcome. It is presented as something only God himself can contend with. Not because Leviathan rivals divine authority, but because its scale exists entirely outside human reach. The contrast is intentional. Where human strength fails, divine authority does not, and that distinction isn't meant to diminish humanity. It's meant to clarify where human power was never intended to apply.
In passages like those found in the book of Job, Leviathan isn't simply meant to frighten humanity into panic. It's meant to remove an illusion, the belief that everything can be mastered, measured, and overcome. The terror doesn't necessarily come from the fact that Leviathan might attack. It's that it really doesn't need to.
Because Leviathan represents chaos on such a vast scale, it's been interpreted, particularly in prophetic writing, as a symbol of things reaching a breaking point. In those contexts, Leviathan becomes associated with endings. Not necessarily because it signals destruction itself, but because it embodies forces people fear losing control over. And that association matters, because it explains why Leviathan feels relevant during periods of uncertainty and confusion.
Whenever the name Leviathan resurfaces, it never really stays contained to just ancient text. Instead, it starts attaching itself to events. Moments that feel sudden, large, and difficult to contextualize. And it's not because these events point to Leviathan, it's more like uncertainty is looking for form.
For example, take the Bloop. In 1997, scientists detected an extremely powerful underwater sound, louder than anything biological ever recorded at the time. For years, it remained unexplained, and during that window of uncertainty, some reached for the language that matched the scale of what they were hearing. Leviathan. Not because the data supported that idea, but because such scale without context is extremely unsettling.
Eventually, various explanations form, but it's the initial reaction that's important.
The same thing happens with satellite imagery. Underwater ridges, shadows distorted by depth, massive shapes stretched by scale and perspective. Online, these images are often interpreted as something ancient, something coiled, something waking. Honestly, it does look like the head of a snake, and people claim that there is tectonic activity near the area that would be its nose and its mouth. It's super cool and a fun find, so it's not surprising that Leviathan becomes the name attached to it. Unfortunately, we can't really use this as evidence, more like an interpretation. Still super cool. Sudden underwater earthquakes, tectonic movement, volcanic activity. Individually, these are understood phenomena. But when they cluster or occur during unstable times, some interpret them as signs of something stirring. Not because science points there, but because fear looks for intention. These are most likely not evidence of Leviathan. They're moments where uncertainty or the unknown demands a story, a name.
And this is where the pattern becomes clear. People just don't reach for the name Leviathan before unsettling events happen. It's always after. When the world feels unstable, when control feels impossible, and when fear reaches new heights. And that's where the name Leviathan becomes the language people use when the sheer scale and weight of it all exceeds understanding.
And that's why the name resurfaces during times of war, during famine, during economic strain, not as a prophecy, but as a mirror. Every time the world begins to feel unstable, certain names resurface. Not because something new has appeared, but because we're trying to make sense of how heavy everything feels. Look around you. People are scared. People are angry. They worry about their future, their children's futures. And for many, the only thing that feels certain right now is that the unease keeps growing. And that kind of weight, shared by so many people at once, is deeply human and heartbreaking. Leviathan has carried that weight for generations, not simply as a symbol of evil, but as a way of acknowledging chaos and uncertainty in its oldest, scariest form. Something vast, overwhelming, and beyond easy answers. Moments like this aren't new. History shows us that uncertainty has always existed, that there have always been times when the world felt too large, too loud, too unpredictable to hold comfortably. And yet, we kept moving forward. Maybe Leviathan was never meant to tell us that the world was ending. Maybe it was meant to give shape to a feeling, so fear, anger, and helplessness didn't have to remain nameless. Understanding that doesn't ask us to look away from the unknown. It asks of us to face it honestly, without letting it harden us, and without letting fear decide how we move forward. Because sometimes standing tall isn't about having the answers. Sometimes it's about staying curious when the answers don't come easily. So, if this episode resonated with you, and if the idea of Leviathan feels familiar in your own life right now, take a moment and slow down. What does uncertainty feel like to you? What does anger feel like to you? What does fear feel like to you? And when the world starts to feel larger and heavier, what name do you reach for? Stay curious.